Frictional Games is a developer known for making scary games. These creepy, atmospheric, first person horror, walking simulators. I'm not a fan of this term. Not one bit. It is mostly derogatory, used to describe a certain kind of game. Something very light on actual gameplay, far more narrative driven adventure titles. I am a big fan of these kind of games, so when I use the term walking simulator, there is no negative connotation behind it. But for some there is, and unfortunately, it is the best way to describe what they do. This is what they make, what they're known for. More specifically, they are best known for Amnesia. This franchise, starting with The Dark Descent, has garnered enough attention to warrant an expansion pack and 3 sequels. I guess it's a fairly beloved franchise. I wouldn't know. I'm not the biggest fan of the horror genre in general, neither in movies nor in games. I tend not to find them particularly frightening, and half the time it comes off as almost comedic. But it's the season, so I decided to give The Dark Descent a go. I liked it fine enough. The premise was not something I cared for, this whole dilapidated Victorian castle with some evil baron performing highly unethical human torture experiments for some supernatural purposes. It was not something that captured my interest at all. However, there was a lot to like from a design standpoint. Some strong writing, excellent sound design, an appropriately unnerving atmosphere, good sense of pacing, and a strong buildup of tension that, luckily, wasn't very heavily reliant on cheap jump scares. There was a lot there that made me want to check out something else from Frictional Games. They don't have that much to offer. Some earlier titles that I don't even have access to at the moment. Amnesia games. I didn't want to play any more of those. And then there was Soma. Just the setting itself was enough to capture my interest. Deep dark ocean, rundown research facility. Let's be honest here. The ocean can be a pretty frightening place. You want to find some honest to goodness, real life monsters right here on this planet? That is where you go look. There is some terrifying shit down there. You don't need to add any of this supernatural nonsense, ghosts and monsters and boogeymen. You want some real terror? That is where you go look. We don't even know what's down there. We've discovered like 5% of the thing. Sprinkle in a little bit of that sci-fi. Oh, I love that stuff. An AI gone rogue. The whole place is turned upside down. You don't know what's going on. And that's it. I'm sold. Take my money. I am buying this right now. And if it's anything like what The Dark Descent was, I already knew I was in for a great time. And that is exactly what I got with this game. No, that doesn't sound right. It's so reductive as I hear it come out of my mouth. It would probably be more accurate for me to say that this was one of the more memorable video game experiences I'd had in a very long time. The thing is, this game is almost 10 years old at this point. I have no idea how I missed out on it. I was right about one thing, though. There's something there. Even though the setting wasn't anything I was interested in, and the story of The Dark Descent was kind of whatever, I saw something. It's like a band you can't stand their music, but you appreciate the talent that's there. You just kind of wish they'd switch up genres instead of continuing this dark death metal thing they're up to. That's a bit like my relationship with The Dark Descent and Soma. Everything I loved about that game was amplified in Soma, and everything I couldn't stand was practically non existent. From the beginning to the end, I was completely enthralled. Soma did everything practically perfectly. Whenever I make a video, I'm always going to be as honest and objective as I could possibly be. I'll spend at least a couple of minutes covering some of the flaws I noticed, regardless of how amazing an experience it was. But as I sit here recording this, I am struggling to think of one. It did everything right. Okay, maybe this. There were some times where I'm being stalked by one of the monsters in the facility. I'm tucked away in a dark corner, crouching, completely tense, hoping it doesn't notice me and just shuffles off. And the music felt too loud, almost as if it was attacking my ears. That might be considered a flaw. Maybe it was my personal sensibilities and I didn't care for it, and someone else out there has absolutely no problem with it. But if I have to mention something, if I have to think of something, it would be only that. Everything else was done to perfection. Soma managed to address the two main issues I had with The Dark Descent that kept it from true greatness, in my occasionally humble opinion. From a gameplay perspective, I was not the biggest fan of this light and dark mechanic, constantly causing me to check every room needlessly, opening drawers and dressers, looking for these little tinder boxes so I could light the candles and torches in my environment, or more oil to refill this ridiculously rapidly depleting lantern I had to carry around. Couple that with this insanity mechanic where walking around in the dark for too long made you so frightened that you were paralyzed in fear, crawling on the ground, barely able to move, and you have a formula for something that, while on paper seems like a great idea for a horror game, it just doesn't work. It felt like a contrivance forming this endless loop where needing to keep your environment properly lit in order to traverse it required you to stop traversing it in order to find the resources necessary to keep it lit in the first place. I could have done without all of this and would have been perfectly fine fumbling around in the dark for a bit, occasionally lighting a torch here and there or using my lantern when necessary. It's almost as if they created a problem, then created a secondary problem that was supposed to solve both problems, but what ended up happening was it formed a third problem all its own. One that ultimately hinders the flow of what is fundamentally a well-paced game. Thankfully, Soma does away with this altogether. You're given a flashlight early on. It doesn't run out of power, so you don't have to ransack every room you enter looking for batteries or some bullshit like that. And the lighting is no longer a gameplay mechanic, but rather used as a tool to enhance the overall aesthetic, giving this facility a feeling of dread, or as a means to add tension at appropriate moments. This change alone went a long way in making this a far tighter and more focused experience. However, it was addressing Amnesia's biggest weakness that became Soma's greatest strength. Now, if I'm being fair, I can't actually say that the story of the Dark Descent is a flaw, necessarily. It is well written. The game does a good job of drip feeding information regarding your role in the events that have transpired in this place. Plus, the revelation that you are pretty much no better than this evil baron you've been hunting down was something I did not expect. My problem is with the way it's told. There isn't a whole lot of voice acting, so the great majority of the story is told through these random letters you find scattered throughout the game. Admittedly, they are easy to find, so you're not likely to miss much, if anything at all. Also, the main character does have a voice actor that reads out his journal whenever you find those pages. He's fairly believable, if occasionally overly dramatic for no reason in the middle of his narration. It's fine. I'm willing to give all of this a pass because you could tell this was a fairly low budget affair. Regardless, the story itself was not something I found interesting. In a lot of regards, it was kind of forgettable and generic. So I stand by my assertion that it is by far the weakest aspect of Amnesia. This is by no means meant as an indictment of the game or its story. Clearly, it is a beloved franchise. If not, Frictional Games wouldn't have bothered making so many sequels, and I could see why. Quite frankly, my opinions on the story, whether or not I like them, are irrelevant. It's just that I've only ever played these two games from this developer, so I can't help but compare the two and notice the stark contrast in their respective approaches to storytelling. Both games are actually very similar, they just go in complete opposite directions. In The Dark Descent, you are practically the only living thing in this entire castle. By the time you interact with someone else, you've played about 90% of the game. This communicates a sense of isolation and loneliness that you feel throughout your entire experience. In Soma, fairly early on, you get to interact with other characters in this game world. You meet a friend that you form a close yet somewhat contentious relationship with. This introduces a different form of loneliness, an existential loneliness that I cannot elaborate on because it is the main focus of the story itself. The Dark Descent uses these notes and journal entries as the primary storytelling tool, meaning that if you're not that big into reading these things, and I know that's happened to me a ton of times, I'm having a great time, I open up some journal and it's like 6 paragraphs long. I don't want to bother reading all of this, I just want to keep playing. Or perhaps you missed out on a couple of them. There is a possibility you have some gaps, an incomplete understanding of what's been going on in this place. Whereas in Soma, it is very direct and unambiguous. There are still these notes and journal entries and audio logs, but they serve more as world building, giving you better insight into this environment, as opposed to being the primary source of information, meaning that you could skip out on all of them and still have full understanding of this plot. Even the way the plots reveal themselves to the players are in opposite ends of the spectrum. The Dark Descent plays out like a slow boil mystery, leaving small clues that all come together right near the end of the game. Soma, on the other hand, tells you pretty much everything that's going on within the first few hours, to the point where I'd already guessed what I am before the game itself even told me. Being able to predict something like this would normally be somewhat disappointing, but the game used this to subvert my expectations, taking the story somewhere completely unexpected. It begins posing questions. thoughtful questions regarding what it means to be human and the very nature of existence itself. It was still all spooky and dark and tense and all that, but mostly only aesthetically at this point. It went all deep and introspective and shit on me, even becoming kinda sad. I started to feel bad for all the survivors of this awful situation. This change in tone out of nowhere is what made this story genuinely stand out. It was sincere in its approach, and that is rare in video games, especially one with this premise. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering what the premise even is. What is this game about? What even is a Soma? This is a bit of a challenge for me, but it is deliberate. Whenever I cover a narrative-driven game such as this, I am going to try my damnedest to disclose as little as possible, if anything at all, regarding that story. I am so glad that I knew nothing about Soma when I started to play it. It made it so much more enjoyable for me, and I do not want to deprive any person that goes and plays this game because of this video any bit of that joy. So, I generally tend to avoid the story. But, you know what? Here goes. You've got guy, gets into car accident, girlfriend dies, not really relevant, ends up with brain blood syndrome, has to constantly have it drained. He's gonna die soon. So he decides he's gonna undergo this experimental brain scan therapy thing that may or may not save his life. It's not specified. Conducted by some doctor. Or was he a doctor? No. Med student. I think this might have been his thesis statement. I don't know. Agrees to meet him somewhere. The place is already kind of shady. Says hi. Doctor says, sit down right here. Let's begin. He sits down. Boom. Wakes up like 100 years later in this underwater sea place facility thing. Completely turned to shit. Stuff happens. You're welcome. Alright, now that I got that out of the way, it's all I'm gonna say, all I'm willing to say. If that wasn't good enough, if you want to know more about the story, I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry. Too bad. I don't care. Check out the game for yourself. The less I say, the better. It is worth playing just for the story alone. It is excellently written, perfectly paced, and surprisingly evocative. But if you need another reason or two, I'll happily oblige. If you're into these dark and spoopy, atmospheric horror type games, or just a fan of walking simulators in general, this is right up your alley. Shit, if you're a fan of the Amnesia franchise, I know I said some negative things about The Dark Descent, but I did like it. I know one of these days I'm gonna come around and check out the other ones. There's some really good stuff there. Although, I would prefer to play more Soma if I had my way. I don't get it. Everyone remembers Amnesia. Nobody seems to remember this. It's happened to me in real time. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing a project on Soma. Blank stare. Question mark over the head. Huh? What is that? Oh, you remember the Amnesia games? Oh, yeah. Yeah, same people. Oh, cool. It boggles the mind. Amnesia got a sequel like a year ago. This? Lost to the ether. And it's not like there isn't stuff there. A prequel of this story, showing the events that lead up to where this game starts, would make for an excellent title. But it never happened. I don't know why. You know what? Frictional games, you guys, listen to me. Get on that shit. Get on it right now. It might be like a decade late, but better late than never. And I would definitely hand you every penny to play more of this. Chop chop, go. Start making it.